Welcome to the Workplace Wellbeing Essential Series. I'm Mari Ryan. I'm the CEO and founder of Advancing Wellness. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to this expert interview where we explore topics that impact employee well-being. My guest today is Jason Lauritsen. Jason is a keynote speaker, author, business advisor, and a leadership trainer. And his first book, where do I have that here? That first book, Social Gravity, the Harnessing the Natural Laws of Relationships. And his second book, you can see on the shelf behind him, Unlocking High Performance. He's a thought leader on the topics of employee engagement and workplace culture. Previously in his career, Jason held several roles as a VP of Human Resources. He lives near Omaha, Nebraska, with his wife, 3 children, and Chloe the dog. When he's not working, he can be found hanging out with his family, running, and watching sports. Jason, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, today we're going to explore the topic of employee well-being and how it is vital to engagement and work performance. And we want to explore why leaders at all levels in organizations should really be paying attention to employee well-being. So Jason, I wonder if we could start with your experience as a VP of HR. How did you think about and look at well-being of your workforce?
Well, I wish it's an interesting story. I wish I could tell you that I sort of intuitively understood the power of wellness from the very beginning, or well-being from the very beginning, but that would be a lie. I would be rewriting history. I honestly, for the first, I would say for the first maybe 3, 4, 5 years of my career in HR, I was on the talent acquisition side early on. Mm-hmm. And so I was sort of peripherally, I'd see us do some things, or, like a health fair or something like that. And I'll be honest that I didn't really understand. I didn't get it. I was like, why are we doing this? This makes no sense to me. Like, it didn't make any sense to me at the time. And then eventually I transitioned. There was a couple of jobs later. I got hired on as the head of HR for a regional bank. And this particular organization had been pretty serious about workplace well-being or workplace wellness for years. And they really saw it as, it was more of a benefit, I guess. It was sort of like supporting employees. And so it was oriented towards those who I think were interested in wellness and would invest in their own wellness. And so some employees got a lot out of it and others maybe didn't. And then when I got there, it was at the time when, if you remember kind of that period of time, when wellness kind of had its first moment, when we convinced the world that wellness programs were going to be the lever that could reduce our healthcare expenses, right? We were going to make employees more healthy, therefore they'd use less healthcare, and we'd all come out ahead. And so we went all in on this. And our organization, we designed all of the programs, and we got really into, my team was pretty progressive. It was fun. We got into some behavioral economics stuff. We got into some incentives, to steer behavior, like the whole deal. We wrapped it all together. And of course, as we know now, that was all sort of tilting at windmills. Like it wasn't actually possible. It didn't play out that way. And so I think I ultimately came around when I started to really dig into employee engagement and really dig into an understanding of this work that we do when we're trying to figure out how do we create optimal environments where human beings can do their work, do their best, live up to potential. There was a moment, and I don't think it was a moment, I think it was more of a journey where I started to recognize through my own experience first, and then seeing it in the workplace, that everything starts when we talk about engagement as if it happens, it's at work, right? Once you punch in to when you leave, that's when engagement happens. Right. And what I realized in my own experience is that my performance at work had a lot to do, especially in my 20s when my life was in more chaos, with what happened outside of work. I participated in a starter marriage, and I remember when my marriage was falling apart and I thought my wife was cheating on me. Like I couldn't show up to work and give, like, my well-being was a disaster. So when I showed up at the door in the morning, I didn't have much to give, or I was pretty, I was a work hard, play hard guy. And so there was a lot of nights I'd get done at work and I'd go out with friends, and I would be out until, well, God knows when, at the bar with my friends, drinking too much, hung over the next morning. When I showed up at work, I don't care how young you are. When you're hungover, you're not going to do your best work. And so I started to understand finally that well-being is it's a performance capacity issue. And so if our well-being as human beings is diminished, then that means I only have some fraction of my potential to even offer when I get to work. And this is fundamentally why we should care. And so that was sort of my journey to understanding it. I wish I got it or would have understood it earlier when I was in corporate HR. I didn't. We did a lot of good stuff that helped people, but it wasn't necessarily for the right reasons.
Well, thank you for sharing your journey along those lines. I'm curious, from looking at the way that organization really created a culture of health in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see any impact on productivity and engagement in that workforce?
I think here's what I would say is I think that we probably did. What I would say, though, is that I need to tread lightly here because I was not a good fit for banking. The way that banking measures and tracks performance, or the way that at least traditional banking part of the reason I was not a good fit is because I had always been in organizations that were much more productivity oriented in terms of maximizing throughput and maximizing output. And that isn't necessarily always the way that the banking world operates. And so I think it was hard to track some of that. I would say that I think that, we saw some benefits in terms of employee, what I would say like employee happiness or employee satisfaction, I think improved. I would say that I think the bigger impact in the way that we did it, we had very social programs. And I think that's one of the places that I started to realize early on is that wellness, and then probably by nature of my first book being about relationships and social capital, is that wellness programs, one of the things that wellness programs have historically done really well that I don't know that they've really leaned into is they bring people together, they create community, they create belonging, they give people something to be a part of. And we struggle with that so much in organizations, especially today when we're remote. And so we saw that impact, but I don't know that we could draw a straight line back to, we were so focused on health outcomes and our risk rating or claims data that we missed, I think, the bigger story about performance at the time.
Okay, well, I appreciate your honesty on that topic. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what you think, why do you think senior leaders fail to prioritize well-being? And kind of a second question with that is, what needs to happen to make employee well-being a real priority in the workplace?
Well, I think on the first question, I think about my own journey to understanding this is that I think it's rooted in, and this is just my I guess musings, is I think it's rooted in, we have a very complicated relationship with our own well-being. We're very good at, until you find your way to a clarity or a really authentic understanding and commitment to your own well-being, where you start to connect the dots between your behavior and choices to your health and wellness around mental health, physical health, emotional, spiritual, financial health, all of that. And then sort of commit to sort of closing that circle and taking ownership of that. If you're in denial in your own life, your relationships are not in a good place and you just don't want to see it, or you're financially out of control, or your health is not in control. And I think it's hard as a leader because you understand the gravity of your role, of your, the accountability you have for organizational outcomes, that if you're living in denial of your own well-being, and your own role in that, I think it's really hard then to step and say, okay, we should be asking, our employees should be getting healthier or having better relationships or taking control of their finances. I think that it's wrapped up in a complicated relationship at the very individual level. At least that's my part of my suspicion. Part of it is also it's hard to see, or it had traditionally been hard to see. And so what do we need to bring it to the forefront? A global pandemic certainly helped. Yeah. And so, it's not, I don't know, we're here having this conversation today. I am more optimistic about organizational commitment to well-being going forward than I have been ever. And it's, unfortunately, we've paid an enormously high cost to get here, but I think leaders couldn't escape the impact of well-being over the last year. I mean, they see now, like, well, when our family situation is spiraling out, or my kids are struggling, or whatever, my health, my mental health, we can see it, like it's right here in our Zoom screen, right? And so I think it's been hard to deny it. And so I think right now we're at an awakening period where leaders are finally having to confront it. And that means, I think once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. And, it's interesting when the world pauses, literally stops to pay attention to health, then it's hard to ignore. And I'm hoping, and I'm delighted to hear how optimistic you are. I'm hoping that senior leaders really recognize this and that they can now embrace this.
I'm hoping, I think we're not anywhere near far enough down the road, right? We're not, there's some really, one of the things that really hit me is I saw, I think it's PwC, there was a pulse that they did, and like a general employee pulse survey they did back in November. And it was really interesting because in this survey, they did some, part of the questions were about well-being and mental health specifically. And what really stood out to me was that in that data, it was something like 85 or 90% of the executives, and I think these were specifically CFOs that they were surveying, said they thought they were doing a really good job of supporting employee well-being and mental health. But I think the employees within that same survey set, it was only something like 30 or 35% were agreeing. And so I think executives are still not realizing what it truly means to support well-being. It's not lip service isn't going to do it. We've got to go further, but I think they're at least talking about it and thinking about it more than ever before. So let's hope.
That's good news, because it is so important, as we've recognized. And I noticed in your recent blog post that you stated well-being is the future of work. Mm-hmm. I'd love for you to share with our audience what your thoughts are and why you believe this to be true.
Sure. Well, I think so much of this is, I guess, rooted for me in that, my sort of awakening, I guess, over the last 25 years has been trying to connect the dots between my own terrible experiences of work as a new employee into the workforce early on, to an understanding of why was that so bad, what's so broken, what is it about this whole thing, and realizing, and this is actually a lot of what what Unlocking High Performance gets into, is I went on this quest to understand, like, how did we get here? And so I have a couple chapters where I go through the history of sort of the birth and evolution of modern management, where it started, how it started, and how we ended up here today. And in a lot of the ways our organizations are managed today were born out of practices that came into existence 120, 130 years ago in a very different era of work. And in that era of work, we were trying to get people to behave like semi-programmable robots, as sort of Gary Hamel has put it. And today it's a very different thing. And so we need to reset everything from a position of that these are human beings, and that the work we're needing to do today is really dependent on human ingenuity and creativity and passion and compassion and all of these relational things. And that in order to really unleash that, we've got to rethink the entire work experience, the entire management, our approach to management moving forward has to be rethought, redesigned around maximizing sort of what humans need. And so at its core, that work is about understanding core motivating human needs. And that work has been around for a while in the corner called well-being. And there's been people doing this work. There are models out there. WellCoa is one that we share in common. WellCoa updated their definition of wellness a couple of years ago, and it's rooted in this human needs thinking. There's a variety of others that are really good. And so I think that's why when I say the future is well-being, it's that it's been there all along. If we want a model of management, go to well-being and look at like humans needs oriented models of well-being. And that is your management. That's your new management model. Figure out how to deliver that, and then people will take care of the rest, or at least a lot of it.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because I love the idea that we really need to understand and recognize that we are working with human beings, and there's all kinds of motivators. And unless we embrace that and understand that and use well-being as the foundation of this, we can never get to engagement. We can never get to positive employee experience, and we can never get to sustainable business results.
Well, it's kind of like, I'm trying to think of what's a good example of, it's like if we were trying to build a racing team, like a car racing team, and we never really did any maintenance or service to our vehicles we were racing with. It's like, how well do you think we would do when we showed up to the race if we weren't tending to the health of our vehicles, the maintenance of our vehicles, if we weren't really getting in and trying to optimize those vehicles? And I don't want to that's a very mechanical, simplistic model, but it's also like the model that I teach and that I break down in my book is that I think what this looks like in actual practice, the management model, right? Well-being is probably the mindset, and it's got the framework conceptually that we need. The actual model of management that exists out there is called cultivation. And farmers and gardeners have been practicing this for millennia, right? They don't worry about, they're not obsessed with how do I get my plants to grow faster. That's not the question. The question, they understand,
right?
Those living things are genetically programmed to grow and perform. It's in their wiring. And so what farmers focus on is, what do they need to grow optimally? I need to put them in the right situation to make sure they have their needs met. And then I need to pay attention to obstacles that are going to get in the way of their growth and get those obstacles out of the way. And then the plant does the rest.
Right.
And that's the management model of the future. And that's what a well-being model of management looks like to the future of work, is it's all about cultivation. It's a complete different mindset.
Well, I appreciate the insights on that new mindset. And let's continue this conversation about the workplace of the future, because we know that in the last year, our workplaces have changed completely. We have a whole new model that employers are going to have to embrace. And that includes this whole idea of how remote work and work from anywhere and flexibility play a key role in this. What will it be? What will be the impact on employee experience, do you think, as a result of this? And employee experience obviously is, got many elements, culture, in particular culture, how do we keep thriving cultures in this work from anywhere world?
Well, I think it's interesting. The fundamentals haven't shifted that much. I mean, I think that's been I'm hearing more and more people say this, which makes me excited, because I remember early on, I was talking to someone, and they said, what this pandemic is doing is it's just holding up a mirror. And it's making us look at some of the things that are, we're starting to see the things that were really broken or dysfunctional before this ever happened. It wasn't new. And so what I would say is that traditionally, most organizations were not good at culture. And just because we were together, we got this artificial sense that we were all doing better at culture because it felt like we had a culture, and culture evolves. It happens. Like culture is either something that you shape intentionally as an organization or as a leader or a manager of a team. You either shape it intentionally or it just happens. The problem is when you're distributed, the things that naturally or sort of that happen without without involvement, when it's happening on its own, those things fade away a little bit. It's harder for culture to form. And so the culture becomes something that feels very disconnected or very isolated and so I think going forward, a couple of things I would offer up, and this is the same advice I probably would have given about how do you maintain a good culture before we ended up where we are today, which is one, you have to be really intentional about it. You have to define it. You have to call it out. You have to discover it. And then my golden rule of management that I teach is probably the most important piece of advice that I offer anybody that's in management and leadership is, and it's really pertinent when it comes to culture, is if it matters, write it down. And in most organizations, when you ask them, like, show me your culture, tell me about your culture, they start well, we're a family based and we're, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, show me, like, you should have something written out that describes your culture. And if I go and ask anybody in the organization, they should be able to pull on that and describe that and then connect their experience to that. And so number one, you got to define it. Number two is that if you haven't done that, then you engage your employees in that discussion, because you have a culture that exists. You have also an aspirational culture, which is what you need or what your employees want. And you need to go talk to them, go ask them, be in more conversation with your employees about this. You have to be talking to them more often. You have to be getting feedback more often. You have to be using their input to improve what's happening around their work experience more often if you are going to maintain and create an engaging culture in a distributed world of work. It's a team effort. You can't do it on your own. It has to be with the employees.
That's great. Well, I love engaging the employees in that, because then they're going to own it. They'll be part of the creation of that. So that's so important. In the time we have left, I'd love to explore a little bit some of the work from your early book around connection and community. These are two core tenets of who we are as human beings, and of course, our well-being. So in your first book, Social Gravity, you talk a lot about the power of relationships. Yep. And in a recent HBR article, they highlighted the impact of remote work and that has had on relationships and changed the nature of social capital in organizations. We don't have the pop into the office or catch each other in the hallway or grab a quick lunch or go for a walk together. We don't have some of those things. So our whole idea of social capital in organizations has changed. So I'm curious about your thoughts on what we can do to foster connections and relationships, especially as workers are remote.
Yeah. This is obviously this has been a big issue. When we did last fall, my colleague and I did some research around just the challenges that people were facing with remote work, and enabling it. So this was 6 months after we'd kind of been forced into it. What are the biggest challenges? And the number one challenge was, how do I keep my team connected, right? And so I think there's a real feeling, there's a gap here. And again, and you hit it here, the challenge is the accidental and serendipitous opportunities for connection aren't there in a virtual world. And so, when I think about the things that drive connection, the most fundamental thing, and I share this, I had a sense of this. We talked about it even in the book. We talk about, investing, making time for, investing in connections. but I didn't really understand it until it was my daughter, who she's now a teenager, but at the time she was 7 years old. I'll never forget this. I was working on a speech, and I was starting to talk about love as just using that word in the context of work relationship, and just an interesting thing. And I was like, I think this is at the heart of it and that was when, Love is the Killer app was sort of a Fast Company article in that time. So I asked my daughter, it was just one day randomly as I was prepping, I said, Bailey, I said, how do you know if someone loves you? And she looked at me and she said, they give me lots of hugs and kisses, was the first thing she said, which 7-year-old mind, that makes sense. That is not the workplace guidance that I offer. That is a whole different thing. And so don't do that in the workplace. Yeah. The second thing she said, though, really struck me. She said, they spend time with me. At 7 years old, she understood that what we do with our time is the most important, most consequential decision that we make. And so the way that I describe that, sort of the phrase that I use to try to get this to stick with people, is that time is the currency of relationships. And so the challenge that we're facing right now fundamentally boils down to how are we using and allocating time? And what happened was when we went to remote is we suddenly went to a world where there was no in-between time. There was no, everything is either I'm on a Zoom meeting and we're doing business, we have a purpose for this interaction, or I'm by myself doing some kind of work product. And the in-between moments were lost, where we would be standing next to the coffee makers, catching up on the weekend, or interacting in the hallways. And so what we have to do is we have to be using the time we have more intentionally around connecting. So it's meetings, it's those kinds of things. How do we make room for more human moments, for people to build connection, build awareness, familiarity with each other, to find common interests in our meetings? And so that can be as simple as at the beginning of meeting, starting with a question of the day, or asking people to check in and share how things are going, whatever. But it like that. And then the other pieces as leaders and managers, or even organizationally, is we've got to start thinking again about how do we create space for people just to come together in the spirit of connection, in relationship. And so that's, these virtual events that, whatever that looks like, it might be, sometimes it can be as simple as like, we're going to put some people together that need to know each other on a project, and they'll get to know each other that way. Sometimes it's virtual picnics or virtual whatever, but it's having that time. And so I think, but it all boils down to time. Time is the currency of relationship. So if you're struggling with connection at an individual level or organizational level, look at how you're spending time and find ways to use that time better to build relationship.
Well, I love the concept there, and I really appreciate the aspect of it being intentional. And I think when we tie this back to well-being, you talked about the concept of our personal well-being. If we look at how we invest our time personally,
yep,
and what we prioritize, where we put our time, it tells us what's important in our lives, whether it's your family, and certainly your daughter, wise beyond her years, knows this, is how we spend our time, whether it's with other people, whether it's taking care of ourselves, that says so much about who we are. And it really says a lot about where we stand in terms of our own well-being.
Sure does. And the added benefit to that is, as you well know, preaching to the choir here, that, we're up against what looks like could be sort of a second pandemic of mental health issues coming down. And, May and June are the two peak months for suicide rate in this country. And connection, having authentic social connection with other human beings, is the most powerful antidote to suicide and mental health, depression. And so it's not just about how do we keep people connected to keep to retain them or to get them to perform better. By getting our employees better connected to each other, we very literally might save their lives. And so this is very serious business, and we've lost sight of this. And I think we have to put it back into the workplace. And it's not only good for feels better, it helps us do better work, but it also has profound impacts on our physical and mental health as well.
Well, you've built a good case here today of why well-being is the future of work. So, Jason, thank you. I'm so excited about having you here today. If our audience wants to learn more about you and the work that you're doing, where can they find you?
Best place is at my website, jasonlauritsen.com. If you want to directly connect to me, you can find all the info there, jason@jasonlauritsen.com if you want to email me, or go to LinkedIn or Twitter or any place else I try to be easy to find. So type my name into the Googles and you'll find a lot of ways to find me.
Excellent. Well, thanks for all your really brilliant insights here today. I'm so excited as always to spend time with you. Thanks,
Well,
Jason.
and thank you. Thank you for your work as well. I appreciate you.